So in the next few months, as I mentioned last Sunday, we're going to look at Jesus's teaching from Matthew 5 to 7, known as the Sermon on the Mount. But I'm going to call this series The New Kingdom Way of Life. The New Kingdom Way of Life. And so Jesus begins his teaching with a list of 8 Beatitudes. And each of the Beatitudes begins with the word blessed. As Jesus begins to describe this new kingdom under his reign, he first begins to describe those whom he blesses. And of course, it brings up the question, who are the truly blessed people? Who are the truly blessed people? Now, psychologists have found that the more you look at something like Facebook, social media, the more likely you will experience negative mental health and negative satisfaction. So let me explain. It's because people look at people's happy, clappy posts, and then they compare themselves with those happy, clappy posts and feel discouraged and depressed because it makes them feel somehow inferior or inadequate compared to what they see. They see people's beautiful vacations. Everyone seems to look happy all the time. But of course, these highlight reels aren't really reality because they're just a snapshot, right? A snapshot in time of the best but often inauthentic moments. And so we end up comparing our unglamorous lives with the lives of these glamorous reels, the snapshot of everyone else's life, making us feel cursed and not blessed. Now, ancient Jewish culture was plagued with this tendency. They didn't have Facebook, but they had other things. When Jesus preached this sermon, most believed that the healthy, that the powerful, that the wealthy, respected, and educated were clearly the ones favored by God. So the blessed list was that list. And if you belonged to that list, then you were the in people. So just like our struggle to be like those glamorous people on social media, the desire to be perceived as blessed by God led people to project a positive but a false public image. But Jesus, in this sermon, turns everything on its head. And so his teaching on the kingdom of God was what you might call completely countercultural. Countercultural. It went against the grain of the culture and their blessed list. The culture's blessed list. So that's why I call this sermon Upside Down, Upside Right. Now, does anyone know the term the Fosbury Flop? Anyone? A few people. Anyone did the high jump in school? All right, okay. So you know about the Fosbury Flop. Every coach, maybe now, I'm not sure now, but when I was in track and field, everyone heard about the Fosbury Flop. So before the 1960s, the high competition was only done by jumping over the bar using the straddle jump technique. You thrust your body over the bar frontwards or face down, stomach down, with your legs straddling over the bar. I never did the high jump, by the way. But there was a young high school student by the name of Dick Fosbury, and he grew frustrated with his lack of success in the sport using this technique. And so he struggled to reach the high school standard at competitions, which was 5 feet tall. But then in 1963, in the 11th grade, he started to jump upside down. So with his back towards the bar, raising his hips, and then kicking his legs up and over it. And so with practice, Fosbury began to clear 5 feet 10 inches. But then Fosbury had to endure the mockery of his competitors, because every time he went to a competition using this new technique, which you see in the picture there, onlookers looked at him like, who is this strange guy? Because it looked so unorthodox. Every competition he faced potential embarrassment and ridicule, but he persevered. And a few years later, Fosbury, of course, is known for winning the 1968 Olympic gold medal, jumping 7 feet 4.5 inches high. I mean, I'm 5 feet 7. I mean, that's pretty high, isn't it? Right? Now they jump higher than that. I'm not sure what they're at now. But remember, it seemed at the time upside down, all wrong according to conventional wisdom at the time, but it was clearly the better way. And so these Beatitudes, think of them for that culture. Jesus' teaching was clearly upside down, but upside right. Now, the Beatitudes are not 8 rules or commands on how to win God's favor. Rather, they are a description of living with King Jesus in his kingdom. Yet winning God's favor by ethical living is how many people have understood Jesus' teaching. After all, they say, doesn't it say God would bless those who are poor in spirit, and the kingdom of heaven would be theirs? But with this kind of interpretation, every beatitude is turned into a reward for good behavior. If you do this, then you get that. But is that what Jesus is really trying to say here? I don't think so. So the question is, what are the Beatitudes trying to tell us? What is Jesus trying to say? I think Jesus is turning the way culture thinks upside down, as I mentioned. In Jesus, we find ourselves in a new, blessed reality, even though it seems opposite to what culture is teaching. Just who are the well-off? Who are the truly blessed in our world? Just who are the successful ones? Now, the Greek word behind our English word blessed, used 9 times in these Beatitudes, is makarios. Doesn't that sound like a happy word? A happy dance kind of word? I think there's a song that sounds something similar, right? Some of you know what I'm talking about. Makarios literally means happy, with the implication of enjoying favorable circumstances. But the word happy in English probably isn't the best translation, because happy in our world is an emotional word. But this is probably misleading. Being blessed is more than having happy vibes in your heart, because sometimes you're not going to have happy vibes in your heart. Now, Eugene Peterson, the Message paraphrase, it simply says this. It says, "You're blessed." And I like this. Nice and simple, but you're blessed. Even though the name of God is not mentioned, it assumes that God is announcing blessing upon us as his children and his followers. You are blessed. But the real fun starts when you begin to attach certain circumstances to this "you're blessed" statement. So let's go through, this morning we're just going to go through the first 3 of the Beatitudes, and then we'll get to understand just who are the blessed ones, and the next 5 I'll go through next Sunday. So the first one, verse 3. "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Now, Jesus is not simply saying, be humble and heaven will be yours. that makes it sound like we need to do something to get something. Jesus isn't really telling us how to behave. Rather, Jesus is making this announcement of wonderful news despite poverty. You are blessed even though you are poor. Not because you are poor. Many poor people are not blessed. So when you look at Luke's version of the same beatitude, this is Luke 6:20, it simply says this: blessed are you who are poor. He leaves out the not in spirit, or poor in spirit. Combining Luke's economic poor and Matthew's poor in spirit, we have a picture of a spiritual beggar who has come to know Jesus even though economically poor. Okay? Am I making sense? Come to know Jesus even in their state of poverty. In that world, if you're poor, you're a cast-off. But Jesus says the opposite. No, if you're in me, even though you're poor, then you are blessed. You are not cursed. You are not unlucky. You are blessed because you have God, even though you may only have two coins to your name. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So if we take Jesus seriously, he is saying no one is beyond God's blessing. Like the poor widow who had only a coin to her name, and yet she was generous towards God. In her world, she's already written off. She's written off. But in God's eyes, she is truly blessed, and now God has room to do his living and giving work in her life. Doesn't matter how poor she is. Once God has entered that life, the possibilities are endless. Now, Peterson goes on to say in the Message, paraphrase, you're blessed when you've come to the end of your rope. With less of you, there is more of God and his rule. In the ancient world, in our day to day, the poor person coming to the end of the rope isn't wonderful news. This is normally bad news. But when one is broken before God, having surrendered their life before Jesus, their King, even though they might find themselves in poverty, God pours out his lavish blessing on them. They are God's children in God's kingdom, and they are truly blessed. With less of us, less of you, there is more of God to shape you and mold you. Now let's look at the next one. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. So who are the mourners? Who are those who weep and cry? Well, they are those who grieve when they face the experience of tragedy, sickness, facing injustice, facing death of a loved one. These are the mourners. Those who mourn also include those who reach out to the mourners. They're sharing the pain of those who experience this injustice, the tragedy. And so you have those who are affected by some type of tragedy, but then you have people who are ministering to these type of people, but they're mourning for them. Yet shockingly, Jesus says, you're blessed. How can this be? Because they look like the unluckiest people on planet Earth because they're going through these horrible things. And so like the poor, Those who mourn are easily forgotten and written off. The world travels way past them. Most of us would rather hang out with happy people, right? It's hard to spend your lives caring for those who mourn. So this is very upside down. In deep mourning, it looks as though God has abandoned you, perhaps. The voice of the world might say, why do you keep trusting in your God? Because they say, he should have protected you. If God is a God of blessing, you should be living in a nice house by now. Your health should be perfect. Your financial book should be in order. But with tears flowing down their cheeks, God says, you're blessed? Absolutely, that's what it says. You see, Jesus is talking about the kind of mourning that is directed at God. They're going through all these tragedies, and yet these are the people whom God has found, and now their lives are directed toward God in prayer. These are the kind of people who cry out, how long, O Lord? They're living in suffering, and yet they're speaking to God. They're seeking God. These people remind me of Simeon and Anna. Do you recognize those names? They met baby Jesus in the temple, right? They were no names. The mother of Jesus, Mary, is the same. Didn't have much, little power, little influence, according to the world's standards, but they were all longing for justice from God. They were still seeking him. They longed for the fulfillment of God's promises. And when they saw Jesus, they knew God had arrived. These are people in spiritual exile, yet they're persevering in prayer. With Jesus as our King and Lord, even though there might be tears running down your cheeks, do you know that you're blessed? Do you know that you're blessed? Makarios. That's what Jesus is saying. Makarios. Those who mourn. Jesus has entered into the pain of the mourner and into the life of the mourner, and he brings them comfort in a quiet way. God doesn't waste a teardrop. 2 Corinthians 1:3 says, blessed be the God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our afflictions, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with a comfort which we ourselves are comforted by God. But then Jesus says, not only in the present, but the future, for Jesus says, for they will be comforted. Interesting to note that the first beatitude and the eighth beatitude speaks about the blessing in the present, but everything in between is will. It's about the future. As if to say, God's presence, his kingdom presence is here now, and yet it's something still in the future. And it's true. It's not all finished yet. One day in the future, you will be richly blessed, because as a child of God, one day when Jesus returns, there will be no more mourning, no more tears, and no more pain. Righteousness, justice will arrive. So embrace this new kingdom reality, even when tears are running down your cheeks. This is true now, but also tomorrow. Let's look at the final one. Blessed are the meek, or gentle, for they will inherit the earth. People who had all the influence and power in Jesus' day were aggressive. They dominated others to get ahead. This was the Roman way. They built their kingdoms by trampling on the weak. They are what we might call the big-headed people of the world, proud, influential, powerful. They appear to have a lot of property, all kinds of land, real estate, power. And so generally in our culture, we wish we had what they have. We want their success. But Jesus turns to us, his followers, and say, consider yourselves blessed as the one who gives up on aggression and pride to get ahead. But those who have chosen Jesus' way of gentleness, meekness, humility towards others, they are the ones who will inherit not just a nice piece of real estate in New York City or wherever. You will inherit the entire earth, it says, right? It's supposed to be mind-blowing. The first two Beatitudes were individual qualities of a follower, but meekness is really about your relationships with others. Meekness doesn't mean weakness, however. Jesus, of course, even calls himself gentle and humble in heart. But of course, we know that Jesus was never afraid to challenge hypocrisy when he smelt it. He called a spade when the Spirit of God led him to do so. But Jesus treated most humanity with grace and gentleness. Jesus is saying to us, when we treat others with gentleness, dignity, and respect, it may not seem like we get ahead. So it seems backwards. But in God's economy, the meek inherit the earth. God's kingdom in its full fulfillment is the new heaven and the new earth. It's the everything. I mean, what a promise. Ultimately, as those who are led by the Spirit of Jesus, treating others with gentleness and meekness, that will have true, lasting influence in the world, leading others to a life with God. Jesus' life, it really is our example. He came in humility by becoming like us. He came in love and gentleness and brought redemption to the world in a way power and aggression never will. In the shadow of a dog-eat-dog world, consider yourselves blessed as you treat others with meekness, because God is using you to change this world one relationship at a time. One day, the powerful will be no more. Can you imagine that? The powerful will be no more, but the meek will inherit the earth under the reign of Jesus. Leith Anderson tells a story about a bicycle race in India. And the object of the race was to go the shortest distance possible within a specified time. Have you been in a bicycle race like that before? So at the start of the race, everyone is queued up at the start line. And when the gun sounded, all the bicycles, as best they could, stayed put. And racers were disqualified if they tipped over or one of their feet touched the ground. And so they would kind of inch forward just enough to keep their bikes balanced. When the time was up, another gun sounded, and the person who had gone the farthest was the loser. And the one who'd gone the shortest from the start line was declared the winner. I bet you've never been to a bicycle race like that before. So imagine signing up for this kind of bicycle race, not understanding how the race works, right? You come in your cockiness, right? You bring your bike. When the race starts, you pedal as hard as you can and fast as you possibly can. You're out of breath, you're sweating, you're delighted because you look back and everyone's still at the start line. And you're going, woo, I'm just way ahead of everyone else. You pushed harder, stronger, faster. At last you hear the gun and ends the race, and you're delighted because you are unquestionably the winner. Except you're unquestionably the loser, because you misunderstood how the race is won. And so here in the Beatitudes, Jesus gives us the rules to those who are truly blessed in the race of life. The finish line is painted on the other side of our deaths, right in front of the throne of God himself, and there you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. The winning strategy of this life and for all eternity is to love God, fear God, care about others in gentleness. Even though in this journey of life you find yourself getting ripped off, maybe even crying, those who find themselves wrapped in God's presence, abiding in Jesus, are the truly lucky ones. They are the ones blessed because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. They are the ones who know everlasting comfort, and they will inherit the earth, living under the loving, awesome reign of Jesus forever. What we think is upside down in God's economy is upside right. No one is beyond God's blessing, even those whom society calls losers. So this morning, we want to take up the Lord's Supper. And so it's a good opportunity to reflect on God's kingdom, but especially upon Jesus, who lived this kind of life. He came into this world not having much. And he mourned for Jerusalem and its brokenness and its rebellion. And he came in humility and meekness and gentleness. And so as you think about these qualities in Jesus, and as you take up the Lord's Supper this morning, think about him. Because it's through this kind of life, when he gave up his life for us, that brought us redemption and rescue and salvation and true comfort and true eternal life.